If you pluck the string of an electric guitar, it makes no sound, right? It's only when the body of the guitar records the shape of the string and plays it back through an amplifier that you hear sound. Similarly, when, let's say, two black holes orbit and collide, they ring the three-dimensional drum of space-time. It's like the whole space rings like a drum.
I am so thrilled to introduce tonight's event with Janna Levin discussing her new book, Black Hole Blues and Other Songs from Outer Space. Janna Levin is a professor of physics and astronomy at Barnard College of Columbia University. She has been awarded a Guggenheim Fellowship and has contributed to an understanding of black holes, the cosmology of extra dimensions, and gravitational waves in the shape of space-time.
So I did want to talk about the discovery. How many people heard on February 11th the announcement of what people touted as the discovery of the century? How many people heard about the announcement? How many people sat rapt while it was being explained? Okay, same number of people. How many people within about an hour were like, yeah, I don't get it? Okay, that's probably all of you. Still, no, it's not an insult. It's just an incredibly subtle and difficult subject. When the Higgs particle was discovered, how many people heard about the Higgs discovery? You know, it's hard to understand the role that Higgs plays in physics, but it's not hard to understand that a particle was created by smashing two things together, right? You smash two things together, you make debris, you made a particle. The gravitational wave discovery is so esoteric. Here's how esoteric it is. In 1915, Einstein writes down his general theory of relativity. It's his lifetime accomplishment. That year, Karl Schwarzschild, who's a German infantry soldier, writes him from it's actually the Russian front. I was going to say the Prussian front, but it was the Russian front during World War I, and says, I've been reading the Prussian Academy of Sciences between calculating ballistic trajectories, as you do, and I've been thinking about solutions to your equations, and he wrote down the solution for the existence of black holes. Now, nobody called them black holes at the time, but it initiated a correspondence between Einstein and Schwarzschild. And Einstein said to him, the most important topic for me to turn to at this time isn't these, you know, this mathematical solution is beautiful, but nothing will allow something like that to form. So the most important topic is the existence of gravitational waves. And he says to Schwarzschild, I don't really think they exist. So let me tell you what they are. The idea that Einstein comes up with is that space-time around a massive object is curved. Now, how do I know that? If I were to take, like, this book and I was to throw it, was that bad grammar? I speak pretty good English. I write pretty well. I was to throw it. If I threw that book, would it travel a straight line? It would travel a curved path. It's that simple for Einstein. The Earth is not pulling on the object. The object is falling freely around the Earth. It must be that the space around the Earth is curved. I mean, it's really intuitive, actually, if you think about it. And if I threw the book harder, it would take a straighter path, but still curved. And if I threw it hard enough, it would actually go into orbit around the Earth, and it would be a circle. It would be falling all the time, but always just clearing the horizon. And so Einstein comes up with this intuition for a curved space-time, but it takes him a long time to mathematize it. By 1915, he does. Now, here's where gravitational waves come in. If I'm to move the Earth, those curves must follow the Earth, right? The International Space Station is in a circular orbit around the Earth. If the Earth moves, surely the circle has to move with it. But nothing can travel faster than the speed of light. So the waves in the shape of space-time must communicate to the rest of the universe that the Earth has moved and relocated, and that the circular orbit of the International Space Station has relocated with the Earth. Those very waves are the gravitational waves. Now, Einstein told Schwarzschild in 1916 he didn't think that they were real. Okay, it's really interesting. And then in 1936-7, he writes a paper saying, again, he goes back and forth on this for a while. He writes a paper saying gravitational waves do not exist. Between acceptance of the publication and press, he sneaks in a different version that says that they do. And it goes on like this for a while. Somebody says, Professor Einstein, you have to be very careful. Your name is going to be on these papers. And he thinks, my name is on plenty of wrong papers, he said about himself, when I was a student, I was no Einstein. So this is going on for decades. This is such a subtle, esoteric problem. If you felt after 15 minutes of exposure to the announcement of the discovery of the century that you didn't understand it, you shouldn't feel bad, right? It took Einstein decades to feel secure in the knowledge that gravitational waves were real. By the late 60s, Ray Weiss, who's a dear friend and a beautiful person and works down the street at MIT, was a young professor at MIT. He was just hired and started a gravity research program, and they asked him to teach a class in this complex subject of general relativity. And he tells me what I knew about general relativity you could stick in this finger, but he says yes. And because, he has this whole gravity program. He can't say, I don't understand general relativity. And he describes that he was bumbling. He says, I was bumbling, but the students didn't walk out because the whole while he was trying to imagine, how would you measure space-time? How would I understand this in a visceral way, in a physical way? And he dreams up this experiment. Let's say the sun blew up and waves in the shape of space-time traveled 8 minutes to get to the Earth to tell us that the sun wasn't where it used to be and that our orbit needs to adjust on the curves in space-time. And he imagines, what if I hung mirrors that would bob on the wave as it passed? And I put a laser between them, and the laser would keep track of the location of the mirrors. And it would tell me if the mirrors were bobbing on the wave. This is much like something bobbing on the ocean. And he called it a haiku. It turns out there aren't clocks precise enough to do that. So he went one step further. He said, imagine I made an L-shaped instrument so that mirrors at the ends of the L bobbed in the wave. And I put the laser shining between the mirrors. When the laser
Okay, let's stop here. I read Einstein's theory of general relativity. I read all the papers of his colleagues at the time. And this is so overcomplicating the entire notion of general relativity. I have a hard time understanding why this concept is so difficult. But bless her heart, she's actually trying to explain that there are gravity waves, contrary to what the Brian Greens are saying, contrary to what the conventional knowledge is saying, that Einstein himself was completely boggled as to whether there were gravitational waves. Well, it's not that difficult, because in 1915 it had already been decided. But now we're looking at 1930, 1960. What? They're still discussing the same concept. And we're having a wonderful woman like this. She's beautiful, she's great, she's explaining things perfectly. But why? Why? Why is there such a misconception? Like I said, I don't think this was a mistake. I think this misconception in the way of teaching our students has been by design, to distract, to deflect, to continue probably a lot of mythology about time and space, which really isn't that mythological. It's very understandable if you just go back to the original sources. And that is what I'm saying about our present state of scientists. They are lazy. They refuse to really go back and understand what is being stated by the masters. These are masters of our human history, and they're infantile. They're infantile. They are creating this 2-year-old perception of what the masters were telling us. Well, go back to Newton, go back to Niels Bohr, go back to Max Planck, and you can understand it all. So stop the madness. Listen to the women. The women know. They always know. But we have to teach the men that need to believe in science fiction, like there's, oh, we can go back in future, we can go to the future, we can go to the past. No, time is in a direction. Time unfolds with light and space. There is no past without a direction of time, which only goes in one direction as time and space expands. And like the equation of Schrödinger, time and space is the result of motion and light. It's not time-space dimension. The dimension is the result of motion and light. And that's a very simple concept. So kudos to this woman. Love her, love her, love her dearly. Hey, sisterhood, we love you. Go on. Fierce women. Thank you very much.
Combined back at the apex, if the mirrors didn't move, it would recombine perfectly. And if the mirrors oscillated on the wave, like things floating on the ocean, it would recombine imperfectly, and you could measure that. And he called it a haiku. He said you would think nothing would come of it. He started to build an instrument that was 1.5 meters long in the Plywood Palace. Do you all know about the Plywood Palace? This is part of your local history. The Plywood Palace, otherwise known as Building 20, was a shoddy structure thrown up on the MIT campus during the war effort. It was meant to encourage research in radar and microwave engineering, and it was meant to be up for 10 years at most and torn down. It was a crappy structure that inspired its inhabitants to violate it liberally. And they were so inspired by being...
So this is as far as I'm going to go with her video. You can watch it. I'm going to put a link down below. Just a marvelous, marvelous woman. And trying to explain in a very plain, simple terms the concept of gravitational waves.